I've put a group together, various groups together during the day, and tried to get them all by the same line, or at least in the same city and same area. So some are easier than others. The one thing you all have in common is Chicago. And we have Charles Patton who's coming, who's a little bit out of the loop of this, but you guys all have, it looks like Chicago and at least Iowa, or Chicago, Kansas City, and New York.
Oh, Port Huron, that's where I ran.
Yeah, and we got Chicago and Minnesota and Iowa, and you were saying you were kind of all over the place too. So basically we're looking at the Chicago area as your defining thing to bring you all together. So I'd like to start out by talking about, certainly with Chicago, things like the weather. Because one thing I've heard from all the different clerks is that the weather in the car, or the temperature in the cars, was never quite what it should be. And I have a feeling from everybody here who's riding a car in the winter in the Chicago area or Minnesota area or Iowa, you're looking at very high, or very low temperatures in the winter, and possibly also in the cars. So would you like to tell us a little bit about anyone of riding in the cars with the weather and heat or no heat?
Well, I ran on the Northwestern, and that was a bad one. The first run I had from Chicago up to Elroy, Wisconsin. And so we either had heat and we didn't have lights, or we had heat and we didn't have lights. We were one way or the other, you know.
Which was it better to have?
Well, if we didn't have lights, we couldn't do very much. But the heat, sometimes it got pretty cold in there. I don't know, they didn't have, well, most of the time it was pretty good. Either that or it was too hot. They had it, you know. But they had bad equipment. And got over on the Sioux line, it was old equipment, but they kept it up very good, you know. It was old equipment, but they kept it pretty good.
How about you, Don?
Well, I don't remember. The Burlington, it seemed like they had good equipment all the time. Never, I don't remember ever having any lights, you know, losing any power when we were running. Now, sometimes if we were, they'd have a mishap when you were stopped, and then they'd have to get somebody to get the power going back again. But and the heat was, yeah, it's like Jerry says, you could get it too hot in there, and it was hard to adjust that steam heat. And but so then sometimes you'd have to open the door, but then again the door would freeze shut when, you know, we'd go to open it up in the dead of winter, because we had some cold weather down there in southern Iowa too, you know, and all the way across Illinois. But normally, you know, it was well taken care of. Nobody got hurt.
And Greg, what were the conditions in your train cars?
Hot in the summer and cold in the winter, more than likely. But I would say for the upkeep on it, we ran on the Port Huron in Chicago, and I headed out of Chicago. And they kept the heat in the car plenty of time. In the summertime, there's nothing you can do about it, but have the fans on and sweat it out if that's the case. But in the wintertime, I don't think we ever got cold, because they had the steam heat and it was always warm in there. And the cars we got from coming back the other end, you know, they came from Canada, and those guys, crews changed at Sarnia, and they brought it through the tunnel to the United States in Port Huron, and the cars were all, you know, ready to go pretty much. But all in all, I'd say they did a good job on maintenance of the, you know, heat and whatever you could do about it.
How did the fans work with all the letters and all that dust?
Well, it was dusty, but you know, you had overhead fans and around the letter case. I don't know I can't recall whether they had any in the back or front or not. We had 60-foot cars, and you know, in the summer you opened the doors, and in the winter you kept them shut. But
I think people don't understand how dirty and dusty the cars could get. When you think of mail, you think of clean. The letter is clean. Talk about conditions in the car like that.
Well, one time I was deadheading and they had a wreck. We had a wreck. It was just going 15 miles an hour. We hit a freight train head on in front of the depot at Boyd, Wisconsin. I went up to the mail because there was a car on there going from St. Paul to Owen, and those guys, they had letters all over the floor, and the dust in there was just some fierce.
And Don, conditions in your car, did you have nice, clean cars ever, or?
Yeah.
The cars were halfway clean when we got in them. But at the end of the run, with all the twine we had jute twine. And if you had a cup of coffee sitting on the letter case or on the pouch rack, rather, you had to drink it real fast, because if it sat there for 2 minutes, it was covered with jute twine. And so you had to wipe the jute twine off and throw it on the floor, and then finish drinking your coffee that way. And the working conditions were dirty, and you look back on it, OSHA wouldn't have allowed such things, but there was nothing OSHA could do at that time, you know. And so we just overlooked the dirt. Of course, we had to change clothes, but we couldn't get off the train with our work clothes on.
No.
You know, go to a motel,
Everybody
so
had to change
you put on
clothes.
your cleanest dirty clothes.
Yeah, let's talk about the schedules too. It was kind of a unique job in that you had several days that you worked in a row and then several days off. What was that like for you guys, and what was that like for your families?
Well, go ahead.
Well, I was single, so it wasn't so bad, but that's all I did for was layoff. You know, more time off I get. Studying assignment or work assignment didn't make any difference to me, but I was bidding for days off. So when I ran over on the bluffs there on train 29, I got pull tracker job, 4 days on and 9 off, and 6 on and 9 off.
Yeah.
But of course, I was living to home with my folks, and they lived on a farm, and the haying and all those things was figured out when I had a week off. You know, so I could.
Yeah, the other?
Well, I always kind of figured I can't remember the work cycles we had, but I've always said I remember having a job on one set of trains. I worked 4 days on and 8 days off, but then at Christmas time I'd have to make an extra trip that we didn't get paid for because we were overpaid during the course of the year, and this was done intentionally because at the end of the year at Christmas time they needed extra help, so they had our time calculated out from the first of the year until the end of the year that you were going to have enough time to make an extra run for them. So that gave us Christmas help. But I worked this one case on 4 days and off 8, and one of the other jobs I had, I was on 4, off 2, work 6, and off 9. And then I had, different cycles in that, and it worked out good. Basically, I figured we worked a week at a time. The bad thing was that when your kids were small, you missed out on a lot of school functions because you were gone. You were going to be home for about a week, you know. But it was also nice because I spent a lot more time with my kids than most families or most dads would by working at home and being there every day, because I'd have a week off and the kids and I could go fishing, we could go hunting, we could do anything, you know, and they had 24 hours a day to do it, you know. So, and I really liked that. I wouldn't have retired in 1987 if the milk cars would have still been running. I'll grant you that.
I don't think anybody would have.
So Greg, what kind of schedules did you have?
Well, I subbed most of my time, and then they forced me to take regular, which is pretty much a week on, a week off, like he's talking about. And I had a Chicago head out, and I lived in the suburbs, so I was never gone more than overnight. You know, my trip was 3 times a week and up the other end, and he'd be gone one night and then be back home the next night. And so it worked out pretty good on that. And some of the schedules were, the best we had was a 5 and 9, 5 days on, 9 days off. And I always tried to get those to work for the clerk that was on vacation or something. And it was a stand up all the way. We went from Chicago to Flint, and they jumped off of there, and 45 minutes later, caught the train going back, and so you're right back home. And that was, if you worked 2 of those in a week, that was a killer, because that was about 3,000 miles a week on your feet. And but all in all, like Don said, if I could have stayed out there forever, I would have. There was a lot of camaraderie, and a lot of everybody out there worked. If you didn't work, you weren't out there.
I don't think people realize that it was on your feet the whole time while you were on the moving train. Did it take a little getting used to standing on the train, or just the curves and moving and working on a train?
When I got in the Madison post office, I stood up there going like this, see, and they thought I was nuts, you know. I couldn't get over that right away.
But you almost couldn't fall down because there was so much stuff in there. You just bump up from one rack to the other, and except in the middle, where the letter cases were at, and you always could grab a hold of something. You'd never fall down. So.
Let's talk about being subs. I know you were saying you started out. Did you two, Don and Jerry, did you start out as subs at all, or?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We started out as subs.
As substitutes?
No. I went up to St. Paul, the post office up there. I had a choice. I could have went to Chicago or St. Paul when they hired me, see. And I got up to St. Paul. They said, we need regulars. I was a sub one day. And then I couldn't get a pass. Before that, if you were a sub, you could have got a pass on the train to ride home back to my home in Wisconsin. But that I had to pay my own way back home and getting on it. Couldn't get a pass then either.
Well, we heard a little from the last group about some of the bad things about being a sub, being on call 24 hours and doing, basically the work that maybe nobody else wanted to do. They'd kind of trick you as you got onto the train. What would be a good thing? What was the good thing about being a sub?
Well,
Pay.
yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I started out as a sub in the Council Bluffs terminal. I had to go out there. Everybody had to go to the terminal to start. And since I lived in Iowa, they sent me to Council Bluffs terminal, and I was out there for 2 months. And it really wasn't too awful bad, but you might have went home one night. I don't remember what tour I worked. Well, I guess I worked a day tour, but then I'd get called in the middle of the night to come in an hour later than what the call was, and I'd get up and scrounge around and have to go out somewhere to get something to eat, to get to work. And but then when I was out there for about 2 months, and I come back on the road, I transferred out on the road, and I didn't sub for about the first 30 days because I assigned a new they'd switched the trains around, and they changed them around, and they put me on this new assignment, which I was working just like a regular, but that only lasted till about 30 days when they had reorganization, and I got bumped off of that. Then I went to subbing, and that was on, you were called on at any time. They just send you make a telephone call from Chicago or somewhere, say, well, jump on the train and get to Chicago and head out, or have to deadhead to Omaha, and you got a lot more hours in. And I remember, when I first got on the road, I can remember I didn't have a checking account, hardly had a banking or a savings account, and I remember going to the grocery store, and I had worked 2 weeks, and I went to the grocery store and I cashed a check for $200, and man, I was in hog heaven. and we made good money while we were subbing. And that was at $2.10 an hour.
Greg, what would you say? Would you agree pay was the best thing about being a sub?
He left one thing out. It was all straight time. There was no overtime.
Yeah, right. It was straight
And
time.
you could work as many hours as you want because you were a sub. And so everybody tried, or guys I know always tried to get as much work as they could. And like I was telling you about that 5 and 9, I worked that 2 weeks in a row, and it was a killer. We made a lot of money. And sometimes at Christmas time, we'd go, I had a Chicago head out, So you were supposed to wait. You could go in the main post office, which they call the big house. You could go in there and check in, and they would assign you usually to the worst job they had. And but you were supposed to wait 10 hours, I think, before you went over there. Well, one Christmas, 3 of us decided we'd go over there and just work after we got off work. And so we worked all night and then went over there and worked all day. And by the time we came out of there, we didn't want to do that anymore. Because they usually had you loading trucks, outside, or, and that time they had to take Time magazines and fill up a number 2 sack, which is, it's got to weigh a bunch of pounds, and drag those in the back of a trailer, in or out, and do that till you couldn't cut it anymore, probably. But they really didn't like to see road clerks up there. They call it PTS guys, because they were used to working, and the people in the post office weren't. I mean, they could goof up quite a bit, and so they'd put you on a job like, I remember one time they put me on a belt, loading the belt up for 3 guys, but I had the button, and I had them up to here on the chin, and they called the supervisor over there, and he says, these guys can't work like that, and go take a 45-minute break and come back later. That's the way they operate in there.
I have heard a lot of RPO guys talk about the work ethic and the work that was done on the trains being by far faster, better, and all the superlatives versus working in just a regular post office. As you were saying, did either of you two, Don or Jerry, come across anything where you ran across just the regular postal clerks and saw that they really weren't up to your speed, or did you feel superior as an RPO clerk? Let's ask that.
Oh, I don't know. I think we moved a lot of more mail per man than that. They were talking about the subbing. Well, I subbed for about a year in 1960 when they surplused me off of one job, and I made 2 trips up to I had an Escanaba hold zone job, and on my week off they run me up to Ironwood and Hurley on the Ash and Shy. And so I had about 2 solid weeks in there, and I got a check for $500, and I thought I had it made, Of course, half of that was expense money, We got $9 a day from the time you left Chicago till in a 24-hour period. You got back, you got $9. That was our expense money. Of course, we got a hotel room in Chicago for $3.
Yeah, let's talk about the hotels and the YWCAs that you stayed at. What was the worst place to stay that you ever came across?
I can tell you that. The very first trips I made, I stayed at an old Marion Hotel right across from the Northwestern Depot, and it was really bad. And one of the first nights I stayed there was in October, and it was starting to get cold, and the bums started a fire out there, and the firemen are out there cussing them bums out because I had to get out. I thought, oh my goodness, and then you get burned up right away in a hotel fire, And the boss I ran with, Selmer Olson from St. Paul, he said, I don't think they ever clean the sheets and change the sheets in there. He said, I shine my shoes with them, so they have to, he said.
How about you guys?
Well, I can remember staying in some nasty hotels in Chicago, and they were about $1.50 room. And you not only locked the door, you took a chair or something and put it under the knob so it couldn't get open. But and all the hotels I stayed in were not a hotel that you'd ever take your wife to. Because all it was, and you thought they were clean sheets and pillowcases, but you didn't know for sure. But the one hotel in Chicago, there was a Fort Dearborn Hotel, and they were down on Van Buren Street. And that hotel charged us, I think, I don't know, it seemed like it was $2 to $3 for the room. And they had never raised their rates from well, I guess they did raise their rates just a little bit because of Depression. Because at Depression time, the RPO clerks kept that hotel running. And because there were so many clerks in and out of Chicago all the time. But they kept the hotel rates down low, even up until the time that I got off the trains in '67, when they took the trains off. And I think the hotel is gone now, but they always kept their rates low for mail clerks, but I don't know whether they did for, and I think for railroaders, but anybody else that come in, they, had normal rates.
What was the worst place you ever came across, Greg?
Pittsburgh. They had a thing they called a dormitory.
The
Dormitory?
Yeah,
Okay.
and then it was like you'd imagine we're a homeless, like where a homeless guy would stay or something. A whole room full of beds, and you'd put your, you had to put your valuables under your pillow, and you'd have to hold on to them, and your shoes under each bed, under each leg of the bed, because they were cots, and so nobody grabbed your shoes, and it just, it wasn't a place to stay. I only stayed there one time, and then I found out that you could go to a hotel and get a better rate.
That must have been the same place I was at
Yeah,
one night.
Where was that?
I think
Pittsburgh.
Oh, Pittsburgh.
I think they send subs there on purpose.
Well, that was after I got a surplus. That was that was the last trip, and I made an RPO car.
But
Was there ever a town, a city, or a hotel you looked forward to for your downtime?
Yeah. Port Huron had a place they called the Brick. It was right across from the depot. This is the same depot that Thomas Edison ran out of. There's a news butcher, and on the train going to Detroit, because he was from Port Huron, and you could stay downtown for $6, and you could stay out at the Brick. It was a little family-owned place. Had a bar downstairs, about 10, 12 seats, and that opened at 7 in the morning, and I don't know when it closed. But guys get off the train there. We get off 6:30 and wait till the thing open, and you sit there and drink beer for a while, and go back in the restaurant and home cooked meals, and the rooms were $2 a night, and they were always clean. And the woman that took care of them, she was nice, and she'd come down and she'd have a drink with you and all that. So it was kind of like a family deal for everybody. Everybody knew everybody that went in there, and it was that was a decent place to go, and food was good, and that would be my choice. And the price was right.
Any place that you looked forward to, or any town you looked forward to for taking your time off?
I ran to a couple of places. I ran out. They stayed at private homes. And when I ran out to Fort Dodge that time, I stayed at a private home, and I ran up to Ishpeming and Escanaba. And the one time, the other two, there was two clerks come from Ishpeming down to Green Bay, and then they turned around and went back up. Well, this one clerk didn't show up or something. He'd come down alone, so he took me all the way through back up to Ishpeming, and they stayed at a private home up there. And I started out at 8 o'clock in the night in Chicago. This was 8 o'clock in the morning up there. Some Finlander, and first thing he did was drink out 3 of these pop bottles of home brews. And man, I tell you, I slept that morning after he fed us breakfast.
And Don?
Well, I never looked forward to, or I never, just a place when I got off work. It was a place I was going to go, and in most cases we had one hotel out in Omaha that we stayed at, and this was not a #1 class hotel by any means. I wouldn't take my wife out there, and nobody else did either. But the rooms were always clean, and this was done. A Jew fella that owned the hotel, but he kept it clean for us, and it was nothing fancy. You just knew you were going to have a decent bed to sleep in, and get up that afternoon or night or whatever, go back to work. And so I never really looked forward or against, but I got my eyes open in Chicago with some of them I stayed at, I'll tell you.
Well, let's talk about going back onto the trains. One of the more dramatic activities that would happen for the clerks is the catch and the throw when you're exchanging mail with the town but not stopping. Did all of you participate in that or take part in at one point or another?
I did quite a bit of that when I got bounced around. And they sent me on a trip out to Kansas City. Well, I made one trip on a Thursday or Friday, and this was on a Saturday. And it was just me and the boss on it. It was just a two-man run on Saturday. And we had 22 of them, non-stop locals, never been on the line, you know. And all the canceled money orders went to Kansas City. So they put them all in storage, you know, and they were all registered, and he had to write them up. He's writing that all the way over the road. And he'd probably been on there for 30 years, and he knew every click in the rail. And he'd say, "You're there now," and I didn't even know which door to go to. You know, oh man, what a trip that was! And we got out to Kansas City at 9 o'clock, 8 or 9 at night on a Saturday night, and we didn't have to go to work till the next Monday at noon or something. See, I thought, well, I'll go to bed and I'll have a beer on Sunday. And when it was a dry town, I couldn't even get a beer on Sunday. And on the way back, it was in March, and the snow was flying and everything. And I threw this one off, and I raised the arm, and it seemed like an eternity. Hey, I said, I threw that one off too soon. Well, where'd you throw it off? Well, I threw it off at a red shack. It was a switch shack, and on the Northwestern, that was the depots, but on there, the Burlington, the white was the depot. See, and I threw it off at the wrong place. So he put a note in the pouch, and the next stop we made, he sent it down by Star Out so they'd know where to look for it. Clarence, Missouri was the name of that town. I'll never forget that one.
Well, when I first went on the road, when I first detailed out of the terminal, and went on the road, and there was a new case, and I didn't know the road, and I went to work at midnight, 5 minutes to midnight, and clear across the state of Iowa, and we got out just west of Ottumwa, a little ways, and there started to be local. Well, I didn't even know what local was really, but they told me I had a guy in there that was in the car with me, and well, I think there was 4 or 5 of us in the car, but anyway, the one went back to the door with me and threw the pouch off and threw it out in the darkness, and all I could see out there, I had no idea where I was, except the first little town was Melrose, Iowa. And they said, well, you'll see a guy out there with a lantern. Well, we come through there and probably going 79 miles an hour, and I see something with a faint light going like this. Well, that's got to be it. So out the door it went. But I never made any catches. I can't remember catching anything at night. We were dispatching the mail all the way out, throwing it out the door like that at the small towns, so they'd get their mail early in the morning that way and all. But we never done any catching from the town. Now coming back east, we had a few places that we caught the pouches. And so.
Did you ever participate in the catches or?
Yeah,
toss
I
it out?
made a couple, not many. There's always somebody on there that would get a kick out of it, I guess, and so they always like to do it. But I did make a couple. They made sure everybody knew how to do it, and like Don, we had a few stops. I think we had 3 that we made catches on certain trains, and you'd put some places you put the pouches in a #1 sack, which is a huge sack, and roll that thing out the door and try and get it, right where you're supposed to get it. And most of the time you'd be close enough where the guy could see it. So, you're rolling through the station, pretty fast. And it's like a game, trying to hit it without breaking anything.
Well, did you ever have any of the local where you were dispatching newspapers?
First trip I ever made, they'd taken a bunch of trains when I went out on the road, from St. Paul. They'd taken a bunch of trains off, and the guys were keyed off, so all the old regulars took off, and there was a bunch of green subs and green regulars, and nobody knew what they were doing. And got on there, and the guy in charge says, you you know the local? No, I said, I've never been on. But I said, if you do them in Illinois, I'll do them in Wisconsin. So I got them off in Wisconsin, all right, but he did the ones in Illinois.
But talking about putting the mail out the door, on Saturday nights on train 29, not 29, train 8 going east into Chicago, we got Des Moines Register newspapers from Des Moines that came down to, I think it was Albia, and they loaded them in the car, and we put these papers off at Kewanee and Galva, Illinois, and when we go in there, the catch, or the arm across the door is about halfway up the doorway, and we'd have those bundles of papers in pouches, in bags, and we'd get to that town, and we may have 2 doors or 3 doors full. We'd have 2 doors in a car, and we'd have papers back in the other car back there, and we'd push them off at Galva and Galesburg. And these sacks, a stack of papers like that high would probably be 100 pounds of papers there. And when they slowed the train down, and so you'd have a bag underneath that, and you just push them things out the door like that, and just let them fly out there on the platform. And I remember one that a bundle of papers bounced back under the train. And the wheels hit it, and it jarred the car. And papers flying everywhere. It was confetti.
Were any of you ever involved in an accident, or the trains you were on, in an accident or a wreck?
Only time was when I was deadheading that one time, and that was only, we hit a freight train head on, but the freight train was stopped, and they were only going 15 miles an hour. We were supposed to throw a switch and go around them, and the engineer didn't stop, and then
I wasn't on it, but one of our trains hit a trailer load of I-beams that they were taking to build a factory. It was, this was the fast train. It was train 20 heading from Port Huron to Chicago, and it got there. It didn't stop many stops, and it got there in a hurry. And that Grand Trunk always ran with these flat nose, I think they call them Jeeps or something, but they were, it's like you see hauling a freight train. The front of the engine is flat, it's not streamlined. And they hit this thing full speed. The guy was dragging the trailer across the semi-trailer across the crossing where there were no lights, and just a crossing because they were building a factory there. And it derailed the train, and these guys were in a 30-foot car, and they turned over and rolled down the ditch, and one guy had his back broken. The guy that I knew quite well, he was bouncing around, and he was off for a month in the hospital up there. Just nothing broken, just bruised it all over. And I was always teasing him that, because I was subbing at that time, I said, why don't you take off sick so I can run for you? And when he came back, I was doing his job, and he got off the train and walked up to her. Well, I hope you're happy.
Well, I was never on a train wreck, but I know that one of the train 12 and out in western Iowa, there was a guy from Burlington on there, and they hit a grain truck, and the grain truck was crossing the tracks, and they hit the center of the trailer, and soybeans was up in the cab of the engine. Of course, they couldn't run that engine. They had to take that engine off and replace it, to set it out. But I remember one night that train 8 we killed 3 people coming across. Well, first when they got out at Corning, Iowa, and then we got some guy at Burlington and some lady over around Naperville or somewhere in there, and that delayed us, because you had to wait until the coroner come when that was there, and delayed us for about 5 hours getting late into Chicago.
Were any of you ever in a robbery? or had a friend who was?
No, not,
Did you always have your weapon, your .38 weapon with you, and did you practice with that on a regular basis?
yeah, every 6 months.
6 months?
I got by with one for 8 years, and then they made me get one. And then I had it down in Chicago. It was the first trip I made. I come into the depot, and I left it in the grip room. I didn't want to take it to the room with me, and I got it stole right away. Then I got a letter of reprimand. I had to see the inspectors and pay for it. They give me another one.
How often did you run into the inspectors? How often did they show up on the trains?
Was you on the night them 3 inspectors crawled on train 29? That was
Well, I remember them crawling on trains every once in a while.
yeah. Well, on 29 we had 3 inspectors crawl on one night. That was near the end. I think it wasn't too many long before they took stuff off. And anyway, this one guy, I don't know where they. One of those was a Smith and Wesson, and one was a Colt.
Yeah.
And one had 5 bullets, and one had 6 bullets. Well, this guy with the 5 bullets, he had the bullets, and they inspected him first. And then this guy with the 6 bullet, he gave him the bullets, but then he didn't have one in the chamber. Well, he didn't want to shoot somebody, you know.
Well, they told us if that ever happened, that, you know, I was told in training that, you know, you never shoot anybody unless he had his back turned on you. You know, so you never had to take a chance. Just give them the money. It's only money. And we've had money stolen on there by one of the members of the crew. And, you know, they used to send cash to the mail, registered mail, from one bank to the next. And as soon as the train got there, the bank never received their money. And they took everybody off and down to the local post office and gave them a lie detector test. But it wasn't that crew. It was the prior crew that took the money, and they caught the guy. You know, he was a sub out of Chicago, and the first thing he did is go out and buy a new Cadillac, and then put $9,000 in his bank account. Well, all I had to do was check that. That was the last we saw him.
Were you on that night when they picked Benji up? You know?
No, I wasn't. I heard about that.
Yeah, he was. He said he was a Baptist minister. I don't know, but
He was.
They got out to Omaha, and him and his buddy was driving down the street after we got in that night and that morning, and the inspectors curbed him, and he had 2 suitcases full of blue envelopes of Boys Town.
Yeah.
So last we saw him. So then every night I'd get on out in Omaha on train 8, and I'd be dumping the Omaha and Denver pouches up. First it was silver dollars, then it was half dollars, got down to quarters, finally got down to nickels and dimes, see if I'd take anything, you know.
Let's talk about something that I certainly hear bits and pieces about, and that's pranks that were played on, whether it's the subs or the new guy in the car or just on each other. What were some of the best pranks that you don't even have to take credit? You could just say you heard about it or that you came across.
Well, I could tell you one that happened to me. I was running the Schmick and Cruiser and them guys, and we was running up to Owen, you know, and he got a road grip, and gee, I'm lugging it around, oh, it's awful heavy. I opened it up, and here he'd filled it up with all these register locks. You know, them big, you know, them things was heavy, you know. He had a bucket full of them rocks in there.
Brake shoes being put in grips.
Yeah.
Oh.
We had sometimes this happen, and because I had it happen to me, they'd send some kind of, you know, like women's panties in the mail. Somebody's getting it, break loose, or somebody find it was in there, and they'd get it open some way. And then they'd always find the most the guy that would get in trouble if his wife found these in his grips. Because when you went home, you take your stuff out of your grip, and the wife's doing the wash or something, and you give her the dirty clothes, and so you stick the women's panties in the guy's grip and see what happens. And at one time, somebody pulled down on me, and I was just getting ready to give her the stuff. And I felt this silk stuff in there, you know. No way. No, I'll get it later. Don't worry about it. That'd be all you need.
Well, I know that happened to one of the guys that worked on our line. Happened to him, and I was just out to his 65th wedding anniversary here a couple weeks ago. Yeah. Oh, they had all kinds of stuff.
What would have been the dumbest thing you ever remember a clerk doing, or the dumbest mistake that you saw or heard of some guy making on a run?
Dumbest.
Nothing that ever got around and just made you all shake your heads like, he's not long for this job?
We had a supervisor. Had a Polish last name, and they called him Joe Blow because they couldn't pronounce his last name. And he was mean, you know, he just grouchy all the time. And he'd come right out and tell a guy, you know, they'd get a sub out of Chicago or something. He says, "You're not fit for this kind of work." He put that right down in the trip report. So the guy went, "Don't send him out here anymore." But he had one guy that he was giving a hard time to one night, and he was in the sub for quite a while. And, you know, the cars were kind of noisy when they were running, so you really couldn't hear a conversation if you went back to the other end. So he asked the supervisor, "Can you come back here, Joe? I want to tell you something." He got him back there, and he cussed him up one side, down the other. "Don't you ever mess with me again. And you can say anything you want. Nobody's ever going to believe I'd do that. I'd tell you anything like that." So the guy just finally laid off of it.
I can't think of anything.
So tell me about the last run, the last RPO run you guys made. What was the date, and what was it like?
Well, in my case, I don't remember the last run. I had a regular job at that time, and I received a letter registered letter at home on a Wednesday, and I was due to go to work, you know, Friday night or something, and it said, "Your job has been, you've been relieved of your job," and they had a sheet in there, all the different local post offices I could go to, and report for work there. And if I wanted a job there, they would hire me at the same pay for 2 years after that I was getting on the train. So I went to North Suburban and worked there for a while after that, but it wasn't the same. So I think I quit after a year and went to another line of work. But I came back to the post office after being out of it for 17 years and put in another I think forget how many years. Put in enough to end up with 31 years total.
Don, Jerry, your last run?
Well, I don't know. I don't really. I guess I was on train 11, wasn't I? They took me off 29,
No.
and
Yeah, your last run, not necessarily the lines.
yeah, and then I finally wound up, and they shoved me in the Chicago post office for a month. Worst month of my whole life. There wasn't anybody doing anything in there, you know.
Well, I don't know. My last trip, well, it was the only trip I made on the Washington, Chicago. And I had been surplused in April of '67 off the Bluffs, and then I ran on the Grand Rapids for a couple of months, Chicago and Grand Rapids, and then I got a bid on a job over on the Washington, Chicago, and I only run one trip on that because I had taken a vacation. And so the last trip was, I didn't know anything going to Pittsburgh, and I didn't know anything coming back from Pittsburgh except anything that was west of Chicago. And but I don't know. It was just a sad day. I felt bad, and I went home. I thought the world was coming to an end. And I guess, and I went home. And well, I went up to the office in Chicago when I got back from Pittsburgh, and I said to them, I said, well, they didn't have any place assigned to me then, and they said, well, just go on home. And I said, well, you know where I live, and you know my phone number and my address. I deadheaded back to Burlington, and I never heard anything from the post office for a couple of weeks. Then I found out there was an opening in the Burlington post office, and I called Chicago right away, and I said, there's an opening over here, and so they called and verified it, and they called me back and told me to report to work down there, and I had a terrible time in that Burlington post office because they didn't want me in there, and they had several railway mail clerks that got in there, and then I put 20 years in there, but they didn't like us guys coming in that post office at all. I don't know why, because we outworked everybody they had in there.
When I went to work for the post office, I tried to get in the Madison post office, and I lived about 10, 12 miles out in the country, and they wouldn't hire me. I wound up there anyway. They offered me Iron Mountain, Michigan, and Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and Madison. If I couldn't have got back to Madison, I probably would have quit because I wasn't going to go away off.
Well, we're running to the end of our time here, so I guess if I had one last question for all of you, it would be, what is it you'd want people to know about the railway mail service?
Well, I think it's that most of the people out there are pretty well dedicated people. I've seen them argue over 2 minutes, just to route one way or this way. You don't see any of that anymore. And another thing, if one guy got his work done, the other guy stepped up and helped the other guy, and when we were done, we were all done. That was another thing you don't see anywhere. Is more, not only in the post office but anywhere else, I guess.
Well, I go to Galesburg every year for railroad days, and I get in a mail car over there, and I have people come through there and try to explain to them about how we worked and what we did and so forth. And this is something that was kept a secret to the people of the country. And until I took the examination and got into the railway mail service, I had no idea what the railway mail service was about. And I soon learned, and it was a good thing. It was a great thing, really.
You'd be surprised at the people, the public, that has no idea what goes on, when you mail a letter. I mean, they just do not. And, I tell people, I say, what do you think? This guy, the carrier takes this letter and runs from one place to the next with it? You have no idea what's going on. And the RPOs were a good way in their time, but they took it all away from the RPOs. They gave it to the airlines. The airlift the mail and sectional centers and all that, but they lost a lot of hard-working employees.
Okay, well, I would like to thank all of you very much for sharing that with us and coming down today. And we are going to get ready, I think, for our next group of guys.
Okay.
So again, thank you.
Thank you.
You need to come.